Samuel Albert is an art historian who focuses on the Austro-Hungarian Monarchy and the successor states, particularly Hungary and Romania. He's currently engaged in a project focusing on Austro-Hungarian, Austrian and Hungarian art exhibitions from 1890 to 1940. He's currently a Fulbright scholar in Budapest, and his paper today is titled Changing Definitions of Nationalist, in brackets, Hungarian Art as Reflected in International Exhibitions. And česky, Samuel Albert je historik umění, který se ve svém výzkumu zaměřuje na Rakousko-Uherskou monarchii a nástupnické státy, zejména Maďarsko a Rumunsko. V současnosti se tomuto tématu věnuje ve víceletém projektu o rakousko-uherských, rakouských a maďarských výstavách umění mezi 1890 a 1840. Tento semestr je v Budapešti na Fulbright stipendium. And well, the title of the exhibition you've already, of the presentation you've already heard. Please join me in welcoming Sam.
Need a pen, can't talk on that one. So I first would like to thank the Center for Modern Art and Theory of the Department of Art History of the Masaryk University for their kind invitation to speak here today. The material that I'm presenting here today is part of a larger ongoing research project, which has been generously funded by the Frick Collections Center for the History of Collecting, by the Bot-Stieber Institute for Austrian American Studies, and by Fulbright Hungary, which is currently supporting my research in Hungary. So, the Compromise of 1867 brought innumerable changes to Hungary. Some were obvious: the elevation of the Hungarian portion of the empire to equal partners with the Austrian, including all that entailed: the creation of new ministries and of a new state structure, which the Hungarians would now administer instead of the Austrians. Some of these changes were subsidiary to the political liberation brought about by the Compromise. Budapest, or as it was then known, Pest Buda, was to be transformed from a sleepy German-speaking village to a political, economic, and cultural Hungarian-speaking capital of a European empire. The merging of Óbuda, Pest, and Buda in 1873 to create Budapest was perhaps the most obvious of these transformations, but it was more complex than it might seem. While the laws, the regulations, and the administrative details of the newly created Hungarian political offices could easily be brought to life, the need for commensurate structures was just as urgent, but far more time-consuming. The government itself, not just its newly acquired administrative power, needed to be made visible. A rapid program of urban expansion followed. The parliament and a variety of ministries were planned and constructed, and the city itself was modernized. But even this work was relatively simple. It did require the acquisition of financial capital, but international recognition of Hungarian potential empowered the Hungarian government to find capital at home and abroad. Alongside the institution of modern urban life and of modern urban political life, there was also a dire need to create the structures of modern cultural life. The political life of the nation was revitalized and energized by the Compromise, but the creation of a cultural life was incumbent upon the Hungarians themselves. This is not to say that Hungarian artistic culture did not exist before the Compromise. It did. Theater and music had existed before the Compromise, but both the domestic education underlying them was lacking, as were the requisite performance spaces. The same is true for the visual arts and for architecture, for that matter. All the arts had existed in Hungary, but their producers were, if not foreign trained. The various institutions, educational, performing, or display, needed to be constructed. Their construction, both intellectual and physical, was always undertaken with the Viennese example in mind, even if only a model of what to avoid. It is important to keep in mind when discussing Hungarian culture of the 19th and early 20th centuries that Vienna and the influence of Vienna loomed large, both as an actual location of schools, museums, and of patrons, but also as a conceptual counterfoil to national identity. For instance, the creation of the Andrássy, which leads from the urban heart of Budapest to the city park, and which is crossed by the Great Ring, cannot be understood without keeping in mind at least Vienna's ring. even if the uses, scales, and styles of the two streets differ greatly. The importance these new roadways had is clearly reflected in the structures located upon them. A good example of this is provided by Miklos Ebel's Opera House, seen here on the left, which must be understood or at least thought of in light of Sichard von Sichardburg and van der Nul's Vienna Opera on the right. While both structures serve similar purposes and are thus similar in form, both are located on the new grand boulevards of their respective cities. Ebel's Budapest structure is poorly situated as an urban monument. Unlike the Vienna Opera, which can be seen and visually experienced from a distance and at an angle, the placement of the Budapest Opera House allows only a frontal view, which robs the viewer of the grandeur which the opera wants to embody. In the arts themselves, particularly architecture and painting, the cultural expansion accompanying the compromise brought forth a profound question. What is Hungarian? What is Hungarian architecture? What is Hungarian art? The development of Hungarian painting in the 19th and 20th centuries can be closely correlated with the development of artists' colonies. The first of these was in Szolnok, located on the edge of the Great Plain. The colony was founded in 1851, well before the compromise, by August von Pettenkofen, an Austrian, who was familiar with the area from military campaigning during the 1848 revolution. Based during the year in Vienna, von Pettenkofen regularly traveled to Szolnok in the summer. Initially, he was accompanied by Viennese colleagues, but then, as the colony's renown grew, it attracted a number of early Hungarian painters, such as Lajos Deák Ebner, Gyula Agyhazy, Sándor Bihari, Paul Böhm, and László Medyansky. The Szolnok's colony's works reflect the influence of the Barbizon school, but also, there we go, a kind of internal Orientalism, at least on the part of von Pettenkofen, who produced a repertoire of Szolnok-based paintings. It is important to keep in mind that his portrayal of rural life was fueled by the exoticism of the location, not the later ethnographic or folkloric interest which characterized Hungarian painters of the same subject matter several decades later. A significant part of the artistic development of Hungary in the 19th century was the development of an exhibitionary ecosystem. Unlike, say, a legal system, which could be conceived anywhere and simply published to be put into effect, the development of such an exhibitionary system required public and private investment of financial capital, but also of cultural and human capital. The creation and staffing of academies and schools, both public and private, the creation and staffing of museums, both public and private, the creation and maintenance of painting, both public and private, take time. Even as these institutions were developing and growing, Hungary was already exhibiting. It is these exhibitions, especially the foreign ones, with which I would like to devote the rest of this talk. While I have been and will be considering domestic developments, it is foreign, very loosely defined, exhibitions that I think are more interesting. For the purpose of this paper and discussion, I would consider public exhibitions held in Austria, especially Vienna, as foreign. Be they simple art exhibitions, private art exhibitions, or exhibitions associated with fairs, all the exhibitions have the same general goal: to present, in as positive a light as possible, the achievements of Hungarian painting. Certainly, given the variety of venues which I will be considering, there are other factors which vary according to the exhibition's organizational scheme. Some exhibitions, like those associated with World's Fairs, are meant almost exclusively as demonstrative exhibitions, to present to the greater outside public, which would be attending such a large exhibition, the achievements of the nation. Infrequently were works of such exhibitions for sale, as they were often drawn from public or private collections. There are exhibitions which are meant to simply show to a more limited audience the development of Hungarian painters. Sometimes, but not always, these works would be for sale. The final type is the private show, held for similar reasons as the previous type, but to show the greater world the achievements of Hungarian painting, but at the same time and significantly to sell works. Certainly, as we will see here, what constitutes Hungarian changes over time, in part a reflection of the success of the implementation and development of cultural institutions, which I have just discussed. The 1894 Kunstlerhaus exhibition, whose purpose was to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the founding of the Kunstlerhaus, is the first foreign exhibition I would like to speak about. It included sections from Germany, Belgium, France, Spain, Norway, Great Britain, Hungary, among others. The Hungarian works displayed were typical of pre-compromise works by artists who, though born in Hungary, had almost exclusively studied abroad, most of them in Munich. One such example is the painter Gyula Benször, 1844-1920, who studied in Munich under Carl von Piloty, and whose painting Among the Mallows we see here. At the time of the display, 1894, the painting was already in the collection of the King of Hungary, reflecting its perceived importance as a national work. We see here a black and white image as reproduced in the exhibition catalog, and the effect in color is rather different. If anyone needs to take a shot of insulin, surprisingly enough, the Hungarian National Gallery does not have this on display. It's in their collection, but they keep it hidden away for special occasions. Benször's work was typical of that displayed in Vienna, in part because a thriving Hungarian art scene had yet to truly develop. The 1890s was a tumultuous decade for Hungarian painting, and by the next century, a new generation of painters and styles of painting had emerged. In the first decades of the 20th century, two related but strikingly different exhibitions of Hungarian art took place. One was the St. Louis World's Fair of 1904. The second, 4 years later, was the 1908 Hungarian exhibition at the Earl's Court Exhibition Grounds, an afterthought and pendant to a very successful 1906 Royal Imperial Austrian exhibition. The St. Louis World's Fair, more formally entitled the Louisiana Purchase Exhibition, celebrated the centennial of that purchase, which overnight doubled the size of the United States. This fair was significantly larger in size and number of exhibits than the 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition, or commonly known as the Chicago World's Fair. Despite the larger size, at the time, it was neither as well attended nor in the modern day as well known or as well researched as the World's Columbian Exhibition. It is important in the case of World's Fairs to consider not just the Hungarian exhibition, but the Austrian as well. Hungary had not participated in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, as they were too preoccupied with the 1896 Millennial Exhibition, the grand celebration of 1,000 years of Magyar presence in the Carpathian Basin. And while Hungary had participated in the 1900 Paris World's Fair, that exhibition, though in a separate pavilion, was coordinated by a joint Austro-Hungarian committee. We see here the Hungarian pavilion on the left with the Bosnian-Herzegovinian pavilion to its so the Hungarian pavilion, the Bosnian-Herzegovinian pavilion, and the Austrian pavilion there on the right. St. Louis, thus, is the first World's Fair where Hungary exhibited not just separately from Austria as previously, but significantly without coordination. And the two Reichshefte had very different approaches and goals to their respective exhibitions. Austria, along with Turkey, had initially planned on not exhibiting at all, claiming, quote, Ausstellungsmüdigkeit, exhibition fatigue, a condition which would become more and more common before the First World War as the number of exhibitions increased exponentially. In the end, though, the Trade Ministry not only came up with a budget, but made the decision to build a freestanding dedicated pavilion. Designed by Ludwig Baumann, who had also designed the 1900 Paris World's Fair building, the pavilion's construction was supervised by Joseph Urban. Within the pavilion were many, but not all of the Austrian paintings. The surfeit was in the Palace of Fine Arts. We see here the pavilion on the right and the exhibition space division on the left. Within the pavilion are separate exhibitions and spaces for various schools and ethnic art associations within the empire. Here's just a larger view to make it a little easier to read, such as you can see the School for Arts and Crafts of Prague, the School for Arts and Crafts of Vienna, then Bohemian artists, Polish artists, the Artists Association Hagenbund, and the Vienna Artists Association. We can already see here in the art display evidence of the political disruption roiling under the surface of Austria-Hungary, disruption which would eventually break the Habsburg monarchy, the Habsburg Empire asunder. And not only are ethnic divisions visible, the politics of Viennese art is also visible. The Hagenbund, the Künstlerhaus, painting societies from Graz, Salzburg were all represented. The secession, though, is notably absent. They had declined to participate, blaming the organizers for poorly conceived exhibition criteria. The Hungarian exhibition was fundamentally different. As stated, art was not displayed in its own pavilion, as with so many countries, but in the common exhibition space of the Palace of Fine Arts, now the St. Louis Museum of Art. For the duration of the fair, 2 temporary wings flanked the main building. While Hungary did not construct a freestanding pavilion within the manufacturer's pavilion, the furniture designer Paul Horthy created a kind of mini pavilion, seen here in 2 views. In its form, the Sylvanic style, common in Transylvania, it reflects the emerging nationalist and folkloric interests of the day. But painting is our focus today. The Hungarian painting exhibition in the Palace of Fine Arts was a scant 50 works, compared with the more than 200 works Austria displayed. Hungary, though, did issue a bilingual Hungarian-English catalog with illustrations of almost every work shown. The preface by the Hungarian art critic and theoretician Károly Lika attempted to present the history of Hungarian painting in a few pages. Lika focused on the Hungarians active outside of Hungary during the pre-compromise Habsburg monarchy, decrying that, quote, the artistic life of our country lost some of its best blood due to the artistic conditions in the country, conditions which he gladly said had changed. In discussing the emergence of an indigenous Hungarian painting, Lika emphasized the significance of the painter Géza Mezőly, 1844 to 1887, whose work, surprisingly, was not in the exhibit. Mezőly was also not included in the 1894 Künstlerhaus exhibition. A number of painters, however, are repeated from the 1894 exhibition, such as Sándor Bihari, Károly Ferenczy, Fülöp László, Ledyansky, and Mihály Munkácsy. The images exhibited differed greatly from those of just a decade earlier. Many of the artists displayed at the Künstlerhaus had fallen, and rightfully so, into relative or even well-deserved obscurity. Their selection and presence were the result of their Hungarianness rather than any quality of their work. Rather than having to raid the cupboards to come up with works as in 1894, the 1904 committee had a surfeit to choose from, and the 1904 exhibition reflected the diversity of the then burgeoning national and nationalist era of art. Several changes account for this. As previously stated, the academies of Hungary had had several decades to grow and mature. Foreign study, initially a necessity and a reflection of domestic academic poverty, was now a final finish. In Paris, for instance, while it was not organized by the government, there was a support system in place for Hungarians, centered about the painter Mihály Munkácsy, who had relocated to Paris in 1870. With his domestic success and his fame abroad, he is one of the few Hungarian painters at the time well known and collected outside of Hungary. He became the dean of the Hungarian Parisian artistic community until his death in 1900. His salon served as a clearinghouse, connecting Hungarian artists with each other, as well as with French colleagues, and more important, French collectors. Alongside Paris, Munich remained a major center for artistic study for Hungarians and other Central and East Europeans, as it had been before the Compromise. But newer private academies geared specifically towards Hungarians had emerged in the meantime. The painter Szymon Holosy, 1857-1918, having studied in Budapest, moved to Munich to further his education. Disappointed with the options he saw, especially for Central Europeans, in 1886, he founded a private academy, modeled on those like the Académie Julian in Paris. His school grew to become one of the most important centers for the development of Hungarian art at the turn of the century. In 1886, István Réti, one of Holosy's students, introduced the master to his hometown, Nagybanya, located in northwest Transylvania near the Ukrainian border, now Baia Mare in Romania. Charmed by the natural beauty of the area, as well as the vibrant and diverse folk life, Holosy, along with Károly Ferenczy, Bela Ivani Grunwald, Réti, and János Torma, founded the Nagybanya Artists Colony, to which Holosy and his Munich students would regularly decamp in the summer to paint en plein air. And they were often joined by former students as well as other artists. In 1902, after a disagreement with the artists of the new generation, the so-called Neos, who embraced the newer Parisian trends like Fauvism, Holosy abandoned Nagybanya. It is interesting to note that Holosy, like his Munich-based peer Anton Ágbe, who also had a private painting academy, was far more influential as an educator than a painter himself. The colony was a critical factor in the development of Hungarian art at the time. While its painters were interested in the colorful local life, like those of the Szolnok school, the interest was not an exoticist one, but rather historical, reflecting the increased Hungarian and general European interest in folk crafts and folk life. The colony lost its significance to Hungarian painting with the loss of Transylvania following the Treaty of Trianon. Though a number of Hungarians continued to summer there into the 1930s, the painter population became more and more Romanian. The 40 images shown in St. Louis were uniquely Hungarian artists and identified as such. Partially, this is a feature of Hungarian art history. The national displays, which the Austrians acknowledged in their exhibition pavilion, is not at all present in the Hungarian display. The unity of the lands of the crown of St. Stephen is absolute. But the birthplaces of the artists displayed, even if Hungarian speakers, tells a different story. 4 are from towns now located in Romania, 3 from Slovakia, 1 from Ukraine. Typical of the Nagybanya-influenced works displayed in St. Louis is József Costa's Returning Home. Already owned by the state in 1904, the painting, with its rosy-eyed view of peasant life, would no doubt have found nostalgic empathy in its viewers, the inhabitants of the rapidly urbanizing Budapest, where, at the turn of the century, only 1 out of 6 residents had been born there. The others had moved to the city from the countryside, where such scenes as this were not uncommon. In contrast to the Louisiana Purchase exhibition stands the 1908 Hungarian exhibition at Earl's Court. Its purpose and organization are completely different. The Hungarian-born theater impresario Imre Királfi had purchased and developed the Earl's Court exhibition grounds as a new form of exhibition space. While fairs traditionally had amusement areas associated with them, Earl's Court was more an amusement area with an associated exhibition space. Over the several decades he ran the exhibition grounds, Királfi hosted national exhibitions, such as a British, a French, an Indian, or an Italian exhibition. It also saw more specialized exhibits, such as those dedicated to firefighting, naval shipping and fisheries, or women. One of Királfi's innovations was to reuse the same space over and over again, making annual minor cosmetic changes to bring it in line with the theme of the then running exhibition, unlike traditional fairs, which were purpose-built. Perhaps more important, unlike World's Fairs, which almost never turned a profit or even broke even, Earl's Court was profitable year after year. One of the ways Kiralfy achieved this profitability was by having the exhibitors themselves organize and pay for the exhibitions. Kiralfy provided the venue and the administration, but the majority of the cost of the exhibition was borne by the exhibitors themselves. In 1906, at the urging of the Austrian trade delegation in London, the Imperial Royal Austrian Exhibition was organized. Like all Kiralfy productions, it used the same grounds and buildings as the previous exhibitions. Some concessions were made to the theme and sponsor. The Mountain Railroad, an early form of roller coaster, received a new painted backdrop which illustrated nominally the Alps and was renamed the, quote, Tyrolean Mountain Railway. There were general exhibitions of various Austrian industries and regions, including a Bohemian and Dalmatian section, and the city of Vienna had its own exhibition as well. The art pavilion contained all the art exhibited. Showing here were the Secession, the Hagenbund, Society of Artists Manes from Bohemia, Society of Polish Artists Stuka from Krakow, Society of Lovers of Fine Art from Lemberg, the Vienna Artists Association, the Society of Arts of Styria from Graz, the Art Gallery Kunstlerhaus and Art Union from Salzburg, the Artists League of Sava from Ljubljana, and interestingly, a section entitled 8 Vienna Lady Artists and Their Pupils. All told, there were about 300 works on display, few of which were for sale. Notable exception was the works of the 8 Vienna lady artists, most of which were for sale. Also interesting is the variation in catalogs produced. The Belvedere, on the left, we see the general catalog, as everyone seems to know, but the Belvedere also has in its collection a Koloman Moza design catalog, the exhibition seen here on the right. As I said, the 1908 Hungarian exhibition was designed as a pendant and competitor to the 1906 Royal Austrian exhibition. That show featured many similar displays as its Austrian predecessor, the city of Budapest, the Hungarian Curative Water Association, and other similar groups all had displays. But the art exhibition was strikingly different from the Austrian exhibition of 4 years earlier in size. It was close to twice the size, consisting of more than 600 objects. In subject matter, the Hungarian show also had applied arts, including 30 rugs from the Gödöllő Artists Colony. But most significant, almost all the items displayed were for sale. Of the 600-some pieces, only about 30 weren't. The Austrian show was a repetition of the idea and form, if not the actual materials, of the 1904 St. Louis show. While the Hungarian show was a market, the object was not just displayed, they were being flogged. The artists displayed also differed from the 1904 show. As a cohort, they were younger, though several works by deceased great masters were also shown. Overall, while the exhibition was indeed of contemporary Hungarian art, it was clearly geared towards sales rather than edification or a celebration of Hungarian cultural achievement. Here, too, yet another artist colony plays an important role. The Szolnok colony was, at this time, still active and indeed had its works displayed together. But here, for the first time, were works of the Gödöllő artist colony, based, surprisingly enough, in Gödöllő, a small town to the northeast of Budapest, which was also the site of the Habsburg Hungarian Summer Palace and a favored retreat of Sissi. Gödöllő Artist Colony was founded in 1901 in the spirit of the English arts and crafts movement, but was very deeply spiritually Christian, tending towards utopianism, though always with an emphasis on handicraft. The colony had more than 130 objects on display and for sale at the exhibit. Following the Communist Revolution of 1918, the significance and power of art exhibitions grew. One of the first acts of the Communist Ministry of Culture was a show of recently nationalized art, a Köztulajdonodó a köz tulajdonba vettek műkincset első kiállítás, or the first exhibition of art treasures taken into public possession. Interestingly, the title, as I said, first exhibition, implying more to come, of art treasures taken into public possession. Though the government supported and was supported by more progressive artists such as Béla Uitz, Sándor Bortnyik, or Robert Berény, this exhibition was more of traditional forms, reflecting the tastes of those who, as unfriendly to the communist state, would have had their collections confiscated. And you see on the right a view of visitors to the show. You can see just from what's displayed that it's rather traditional art. It is also interesting to note that on the cover itself is a notice that reads, "Holders of union membership cards receive free entry to the exhibit." The revolution, though, was crushed by the forces of Admiral Horthy, aided by the French and Romanian armies. Horthy instituted an authoritarian Christian government with himself named as regent. Many, if not all, the participants of the revolution fled abroad. Some would eventually return in the mid-1920s after a general amnesty issued by Horthy, contingent upon the abjuration of political activity. One of the first acts of Horthy's new government was the organizing of a show, Hungarian Representative Exhibition to be shown abroad, first cycle, held in Budapest, or displayed in Budapest in November, December of 1920. The show was organized by the Committee of Foreign Art Exhibitions, which had several subcommittees: painting, sculpture, applied arts, and the Retrospective Representative Committee. The show consisted of 214 individual works from 60 painters and 22 sculptors, and was intended to be repeated as the subtitle suggests, as the subtitle First Cycle would suggest. According to the catalog, the show in this iteration was scheduled for Switzerland, Holland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Germany. The displayed art was similar to that displayed in 1908, though here none was for sale. The works themselves were drawn from a number of sources: the Museum of Fine Arts collection, as well as the private collections of Gustav Esterházy Schuler, Károly Horváth, and Baron Adolf Körner, though the majority have no source listed. While many of the artists displayed were still alive and productive, a number of deceased artists considered noteworthy, such as Munkácsy, Medyansky, and Holosy, were displayed. The star of the show was József Rippl-Rónai, who not only had 20 works on display, but also designed the exhibition poster. The significance of this representative show was clear to the Horthy regime. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, the government avidly pursued a policy of what Zsoltnod and others have called cultural diplomacy. Throughout Western Europe and in the United States, the regime presented a two-part, somewhat contradictory message: that Hungary was a modern and thriving cultured state, but also that the Trianon Treaty had rendered Hungary untenable and the unredeemed portions of the country must be returned. The representative shows were a significant part of this program. While their locations and exact numbers are still unknown to me, the program seems to have been a vigorous one. The first show was organized in 1920, and by 1914, the 9th iteration of the show was being shown in the Vienna Kunsthaus. That show consisted of 282 pieces, the vast majority of which were for sale, perhaps a reflection of the economic downturn of the mid-1920s Hungary. Many of the same artists as shown in the initial representative show are here again, including Rippl-Rónai, who had then recently passed away. Organization of the show had also changed. A new patron, the Országos Képzőművészeti Tanács, the National Fine Arts Council, which was a section within the Ministry of Religion and Education, was now responsible for the organization, selection, and production of the shows, clearly emphasizing the importance the Horthy regime gave to these representative exhibitions. This organizational placement also fits well with the cultural diplomacy of the time, which was endorsed and promoted by the Minister of Religion and Education at the time, Count Kuno von Klebelsberg. After briefly serving as interior minister in the Bethlen government in January 1922, von Klebelsberg moved to the Ministry of Religion and Education, where he served as minister until his premature death in 1931. Though his career is somewhat checkered, von Klebelsberg can be proudly proclaimed as an educational reformer. During his term, the ministry was responsible for a vigorous program of elementary and middle school construction. Von Klebelsberg was also responsible for major reformations to the Hungarian university system. He instituted a progressive and widespread system of government scholarships, which enabled deserving but impoverished Hungarians, both from the countryside as well as urban areas, to attend university. Should, however, also be noted that during his time as minister, a numerus clausus was introduced. His supporters claim that Klebelsberg personally did not support the idea, and that during the parliamentary vote, he simply excused himself to the hall so as to neither vote for or against the measure. Though given his other statements about Jews and the Jewish problem, this is simply incredible. Von Klebelsberg's anti-Semitism was also bound with a clear and virulent Magyar nationalist sentiment. The other ethnicities of the empire were neither as clever nor as hardworking as the Magyar, which is why ruling over them, as in the empire, was only just. These flaws aside, von Klebelsberg recognized the significance and power of the representative shows to promote that two-pronged claim of Hungarians' modernity, while at the same time decrying its untenable borders. Shows of the later 1920s demonstrate the importance the Horthy regime and von Klebelsberg's ministry gave to artistic representation. In 1929, the 400th anniversary of Albrecht Dürer's death, was to be commemorated in Nuremberg, city generally associated with Dürer. As part of that program, an exhibition of contemporary Hungarian art was organized by the Ministry of Religion and Education. Outside of Hungary, few people recall or even celebrate Dürer's Hungarian origins. His father, a goldsmith from Ajtos, a small village near Gyula, Hungary, had emigrated to Germany and Germanized his last name, Ajtosi. In Hungarian, it means from Ajtos, but it also means having to do with doors. Thus, he Germanized it to Dürer. In Hungary, even today, Dürer is always called Ajtosi Dürer to keep his Hungarian heritage alive, and Dürer's own personal seal is a model of a secular doorway in it. That show, the Neuzeitliche Ungarische Ausstellung, celebrating Dürer's Hungarian origin, was part of a larger, extensive program. Contemporaneous with the exhibition, the city of Nuremberg held an Ungarische Woche. Several months later, in November 1929, Budapest held a Nuremberg week, to which a specially chartered train brought the vice mayor, Hermann Lupa, the force behind the founding of the city gallery, along with 550 fellow citizens of Nuremberg to visit Budapest as well as the town of Gyula. The exhibition is divided into two distinct sections, a retrospective section and a modern section. While almost all the shows we've talked about contained retrospective elements, infrequently was that specifically highlighted. The retrospective section had similar works as previous ones, Munkachi, Signe Merce, Medyansky, and Ripple-Ronai, as well as several lesser historical painters. The modern section was profoundly different than anything that had been previously shown, despite being at least nominally organized by the National Fine Arts Council. A possible explanation is that the Hungarian artist Eugene Körmend, who was living in Nuremberg at the time, had a hand in the organization. While previous exhibitions had tended to show similar works from similar artists, the Nuremberg show presented an almost entirely new repertoire of artists, many of whom would be supported by the Hungarian government in the 1930s. The City Gallery of Nuremberg, which sponsored the show, purchased several of the works, acquiring one of the most significant collections of Hungarian modernism outside of Hungary. The gallery has since disappeared, its collection incorporated into the collections of the Museum of the City of Nuremberg. Recently, though, the museum organized a show to celebrate Vice Mayor Lupe's collecting activity and brought these paintings from their collection back to the public eye. With the generosity of the Ernst von Siemens Kunststiftung, several of them, including a work by Erzsébet Fehérvári, were restored. In 1929, the representative art exhibition program seems to have slowed down, if not disappeared completely, though Hungarian exhibitions organized by the ministry did not disappear. The 1930s saw numerous Hungarian exhibitions in Italian venues, Venice, Rome, Milan, and Genoa. This paralleled the opening of the Royal Hungarian Academy in Rome. The academy was located in the Palazzo Falconieri, which had been in Hungarian hands from the mid-19th century, but was confiscated after Trianon and given to the Italian government, only to be re-gifted to Hungary by Mussolini in the mid-1920s. A dream of von Klebelsberg and the art historian Tibor Gerevich, the Rome Academy became the dominant style of the official Hungarian art establishment. The Rome School, like many modernist movements of the late 20s and early 30s, rejected the energetic experimentation of early modernist movements for more classical and figurative art, paralleling, though slightly later, the French Retour à l'ordre. A number of established Hungarian artists had already adopted these more conservative forms and became some of the leaders of the Rome School. The Italian exhibitions, which I mentioned, almost exclusively presented Rome School or sympathetic artists, ignoring any heretical modernism. The religious, particularly Catholic leanings of this school and its artists also jibed nicely with the goals of the Horthy regime. The last set of exhibitions I would talk about today took place in the 1930s in the United States and were organized by the College Art Association. Two of these exhibitions took place at the E&A Silberman Gallery in New York and were limited to Hungarian art. The third was the College Art International, a multinational show modeled on and named after the highly successful and well-regarded Carnegie International, held annually by the Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh. There was, in the United States, an interest in Central Europe in the 1930s, perhaps in part a fruit of the ongoing campaign of cultural diplomacy. A Hungarian-based summer painting school, directed by Abba Novak, regularly advertised in and drew students from the United States. Coordinating with that school was Elma Pratt's International School of Art, which organized trips to Central Europe and, with the outbreak of the Second World War, Mexico and South America. The first of the shows, which took place in the Silberman Gallery in 1931, though not directly organized by the National Fine Arts Council, was nonetheless influenced by it. The catalog notes acknowledge and thank various members of the council without actually mentioning the council itself. Much of the object selection reflects the council's taste, and particularly its association with the government through the promotion of the Rome School, though that too is not directly named. It is worth noting that the two Silberman exhibits were also sales exhibits. Most of the works on display were for sale. Now, over the course of the 40 years I've considered here, there are a number of stable elements within the exhibitions of Hungarian painting. From the earliest, Vienna, 1894, to the latest, New York, 1938, there is an attempt to justify Hungarian painting, to assert that despite being relatively little known, it is as modern and as up-to-date as any Western European tradition. An assertion whose necessity raises a whole nother series of questions not to be considered here. There's also a very close link with the different artist colonies and their associated styles, from Szolnok in the middle of the 19th century through Nagybanya and Gödöllő to the Rome School, which, while not located in the countryside like the other colonies, nonetheless shares numerous similarities, such as living in close proximity, the adhesion, at least initially, to a common style, and a selected choice of subject matter. The styles of these colonies are reflected not just in the art their members and associates produce, but in the exhibitions created. The history and study of exhibitions provides a window into a country's self-perception and self-presentation. Because of the generally smaller scale, such exhibitions are more carefully curated than larger museum exhibits. And because they are temporary, they readily reflect changing tastes of the time. I hope that this brief overview of these Hungarian exhibitions has aptly demonstrated that.